Hi, everyone. Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah, you can clap for that. Why not? Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming. I'm incredibly encouraged by the turnout for this conversation. I'm Aubrey Mills. I'm the director of Wholesale for Dapper and Wise Roasters. We're this month's residency for the La Marzocco Cafe partnership. We're crazy honored to even be in this position, not only because of the stellar staff that they have here, but also just the reputation of La Marzocco. We also know with this residency comes a great responsibility just based on the platform we have and the voice and the recognition that we get in it. And so we did feel a responsibility to do something bigger than ourselves with this platform. Initially, when we applied for the residency, we didn't have any intentions of hosting a panel or talking about any of the needs of the industry. But when this topic came up for our team within the last year, particularly the cost of production and ensuring that farmers are paid per pound more than it costs them to produce coffee, when we started talking about that as a team, we realized there was no way around not talking about it on this level. We are in no way experts. I need to disclaim that about Dapper and Wise. We are very new to this conversation, and we've had the opportunity of meeting people who are more versed, significantly more versed in this conversation than we are, but we did want to utilize this platform in order to give them the microphone. It came up that this conversation's been around for decades. And so we were asking ourselves, why is this still a problem if it's been around for decades? And it's honestly not for a lack of people caring about it. It's not for a lack of intelligent people working on it, but just genuinely because it's really complicated. It's a worldwide problem, and every country is different. Every production is different. And so we just want to have an accurate expectation for what it looks like moving forward. We're also encouraged because we're at a place in time right now where we have more information than ever. We've had people working on this for a long time, and so we have better ideas and tangible solutions to start moving forward. And so that's kind of where this panel comes together. Honestly, I'm genuinely honored to be on the stage with all of you. You all have extensive backgrounds in this area, and we're so excited that you're willing to share your input with us. If you guys want to go to our Facebook invite and read their full credentials as they relate to the cost of production, you can totally do that. It would take for absolute ever because they are so crazy qualified. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot on who's on the stage with me. To my left here is Darren Daniel, and he is the Executive Director for the Cup of Excellence, the Alliance for Coffee Excellence. He's worked for Allegro Coffee, Whole Foods Director of Sourcing, Green Coffee, and as the Stumptown Head Green Buyer. He has served on the Sustainability Council for the SCA and the Executive Council for the Roasters Guild of America, has traveled to 34 coffee-producing countries to source and forge relationships. To his left is Mike Nelson. He is the co-owner, head roaster, and green coffee buyer for Junior's Roasted Coffee. He is a fellow Portland roaster and cafe owner. He has a master's in science and environmental science and sustainability science, and a master's of science in geography. That was really hard to say. It's a lot of science, and he has a special focus on climate change and coffee while pursuing those degrees. So he's done a lot of particular studying as well as application in this department. To his left is Ana Cristina Guirola de Salazar, or we call her Christy. She's the director and co-founder of TerraNegra Trade Company, and she's a native Guatemalan. She's currently serving as the secretary for the Guatemalan Women in Coffee Association and is partnered with Junior's Roasted Coffee, so Mike, on a project to create a price-transparent coffee buying model for a Guatemalan producer. She has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and a master's in marketing. Wow. And then to her left is Miss Emily McIntyre. Emily is a coffee journalist and entrepreneur, founder of Catalyst Coffee Consulting and many other companies, including the new Catalyst Trade. She has lived in Ethiopia and is heavily involved in sustainability and traceability efforts in the specialty coffee sector globally. So we're just going to start jumping in. I just want to give you kind of a bird's eye view of this issue, and then we can get into the nitty gritty. So Darren, why don't we start with you? When we say financial sustainability as it pertains to coffee production, what do we mean?
I think essentially it's a premium that builds a margin for producers, that they should be given the same opportunity as any other business person to have a proper margin and fully understand their cost of production, so that they can give an informative price point to the buyer at that point. To me, that's the responsibility of everyone that's involved in the supply chain in terms of applying a proper margin to a producer, so that they can invest back into their farm, feed their families. These types of things that we probably take for granted are a daily issue for coffee producers all over the world, not just in certain hot spots around the world, but pretty much all over the world. Large, small, medium-sized farmers are still struggling with adequate margins. So.
Awesome, thank you. Mike, do you have anything to add to this?
I think that I struggle with this question because while I absolutely agree with Darren, I think that sustainability in this coffee context has everything to do with rightly remunerating producers for production. I think that it's really easy to butt up against when thinking about economic sustainability with sustainable development, which we think economic growth while sustaining the environment. But I think that sustainable development can be kind of an oxymoron a little bit. I think that without paying attention to access to resources and distribution of costs and benefits, it can be unsustainable. Yeah. So I think that, for me, an economically sustainable trade would be rightful and transparent compensation for production. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love it. You guys have... Oh, sorry. I thought somebody was also loving it back there. Thank you for putting into very concise words. One of the hardest parts about the answering this question is it can mean so many things, and you're trying to be very specific about something that's so broad, so I very much appreciate you guys being concise with that. Also, if you guys haven't seen this spread by Oatly in the back here, it's all for you. Please do eat up. I'm sorry that I didn't announce that earlier, but there's a lot of food back there. So, next question. Emily, this one, why don't we go with you? Okay. So, how is the topic of financial sustainability being talked about on the farm level? I know that you work specifically with Ethiopia, and so it's unique.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can only speak to my relationships, the people that I work with, my experience in Ethiopia. I think of sustainability as a larger question, as a practice of considering the long-term ramifications of our decisions. This can mean a lot of things. That's why it's a good definition, I think. Practically, this means that when we are developing relationships with producers, we do need to be asking them, what are you thinking about for 20 years from now? Do you think your sons will be working in coffee? What about your daughters? Aubrey Nagash is a farmer in Harar, which is the eastern side of Ethiopia. It is considered the fourth holiest city in Islam. It's an incredibly mysterious kind of kingdom. And it's actually still a separate part of Ethiopia. While the other portions of Ethiopia have been consolidated into a single country, Harar still has this amazing both mystique and its own challenges logistically. One of the challenges in coffee in Harar is that because of its holy status and because it's become traditionally part of most Arabian cultures, there's an artificially inflated market for Harar coffee. A pound of coffee, FOB, might cost $1 more from Dire Dawa, which is where Harar coffees are exported, than from Djibouti, where Sidama or Ayurchefe coffee are being exported. And those might not even be the same quality. Totally, scrapings off the ground under the drying tables can sell for the same price sometimes as a grade 1, carefully curated and processed coffee from another part of the world. Aubrey Nagash is a third-generation coffee farmer who came to us about 5 years ago, and he said, look, we're losing our kids in coffee. We want to do coffee. His dad is 80 years old and still farming at the very top of Mount Gule. And Aubrey's sons are young enough that he's still trying to get them involved in this. Outside of the problem that quality coffee isn't incentivized in Harar, there's another problem. Chat. It's a kind of like coca. It's a plant that is a mild hallucinogenic. And it's widely popular throughout the Middle East and Africa. And chad is you can get 5 times more for 1 kilogram of raw, just grown, handed in chad than you can for raw coffee. 5 times on average. Chad is easier to grow. It doesn't have problems like coffee does, and it has 2 harvests a year. And, even beans are more profitable in Harar than coffee, even with this artificially inflated market. Aubrey came to us and he said, look, I want to build something that goes beyond just me, and I really would like there to be a 4th generation of coffee growers here. And so we have spent the last 5 years angling at this problem. Can we try this? Can we try that? A lot of the problems inherent in not being able to sell Harar coffee for as much money as we should are from a lack of central infrastructure. So on our side, a pound of Harar coffee, I should be selling Aubrey's coffee for $5, $6 a pound, really, minimum. This is a micro lot. He's putting a lot of time into it, and that would translate to, $3.50 to $5 FOB to him, Djibouti. I can't do that. We have had to import his coffee at cost the last couple of years, which is not sustainable for us. And he's still not getting what he needs to compensate him for all of the work he's putting into his coffee. Here's an example. We're not talking about the term sustainability, but it is front and center. Yeah. Everybody's worried. Are we making long-term decisions? Are our partners making long-term decisions? Frankly, a lot of them are still just concerned about whether or not they can sell all their coffee this year and for enough to pay the loans that they took to purchase whatever pieces they need to do production. So in Ethiopia, it's a beginning conversation, but the reality is here. And I think those of us like my partners, Jeff Watts, who is an Alliance for Coffee Excellence board member, so many other people have been engaged in trying to tackle this problem from the ground up, as have the authorities by establishing minimum prices for coffees, establishing the ECX to ensure that at least people are getting paid for their coffees. We have a long way to go, though, in this conversation. It was a somewhat rambling answer.
Well, and based on our conversations, Christy, you have a very similar experience being from Guatemala, purchasing your grandfather's farm. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, in Guatemala, it's a very important subject that we've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of producers back home too, especially since in Guatemala, about 125,000 families depend on coffee. It's, I think, the 3rd product that's been mostly exported right now, so it's a very big deal and has so much history on it. And what you were saying about my grandfather, he left us a farm, well, to my uncle. I wish it could be me, but so he left it to my uncle, and he has no interest in continuing growing coffee. That tradition is not for him. So my family and I talked to him and said, well, we want to buy it. We want to continue that tradition. And so we started talking to a lot of our producing friends and asking questions on how we could benefit of this, and starting redesigning it to produce specialty coffee and getting all those numbers to see until what year we would start getting a little bit of profit. And at the end, it didn't work out because we couldn't offer my uncle what he wanted. But so when I share this with one of our friends, he's a producer of a big farm, he said, thank your uncle, because this is not the right moment to own and run your farm. And that actually shocked me, because that would have been like a second job for us, but that is one of the jobs that a lot of people in Guatemala depend on 100%. So it was pretty amazing, his answer as well, because, that's tradition for them. That's a culture for many people. And what you were saying about the kids is very important too, because it's a generational culture as well, one that many of our generational, the millennials, are not seeing as a very good job right now. So that is one of the things that many producers in Guatemala, even if you reach out to Ana Café, they're starting these new programs that focus on that, the new generations working still on coffee and looking at it on a positive side. I had the opportunity to talk with Bernardo Solano, which he's now the president of Ana Café. And what he said was very insightful and very powerful as well, because he actually said, guys, when there's crisis, there's new opportunities. So that's another different way of looking at it, and it's totally true. It depends on us how we approach this crisis in a positive way and take advantages and learn from it and seek new ways to improve not only on efficiency, but getting that right. I hope I made it a little bit sense. Sounds better here, but
You absolutely have.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and especially the sentiment of positivity toward it. Isn't it incredible that humans have this ability to pivot in crisis? And I hope that the pivoting is not to leave coffee, but rather that we would all come together and find a solution. And Darren, in the Cup of Excellence, you work directly with small shareholder farmers. What has been the sentiment there?
Our program has had mostly great success in the 19 years that we've been doing our work as a nonprofit, but we are a microcosm of what's really going on in the industry. So when we see some of the prices that we're able to obtain for producers through the auction system, which is done in 11 countries, and we do 12 total competitions with 2 in Brazil, the prices have been great, and they've actually been going up in a very stagnant market. The C market from our inception in 1999 to now is virtually exactly the same as it was in 1999. About $1.06 is where the C market is for March 2019. So we are averaging somewhere around between $10 and $14 a pound for all of the lots that go through. So that sounds like success, and it does bring success to these producers, but only for a very small portion of their coffee. There is a ripple effect, and we think that my goal as director for the program is to worry more about what happens after our competition and after our auction, because that's when the real work starts to happen. That's when we actually see buyers coming in, new markets opening up. I have an example this year with a gentleman in El Salvador who won El Manzano, Emilio Lopez, a great farmer who's very, very involved in the coffee community and the Roasters Guild community. And I've been kind of watching his escalation into new markets as kind of a test, because he's now entered into markets in Korea and even China. I was at a cafe in Seoul like 3 weeks ago, and there was a giant poster with his face, gladly put on the wall, and they were serving us coffee. And he's like, I didn't even have any access into Korea the year before. So, that's at our best, we're able to create market access and bridge that. But there's just such a cross current, that we're facing. And I think that's the unfortunate part, is that, there is no consensus, there is no international ICO organization to do what it should do, and that's a long story to get into, the mechanics of why that's not working. and it's further damaged with even recent things with the U.S. pulling out of the charter, and that's affecting the actual institution to try to do work and subsidies and things like that. So we don't have there's no safety net in the coffee industry right now, and so maybe programs such as ourselves and other certifications that are out there can help foster some premium building, but I think it's going to take more than that. And I think the point that we were talking about earlier about children in the next generation, unfortunately, in most of, at least Latin America, there's a little bit of shame in generationally taking on your family's farm. There's more of an interest to go to the cities and try to make money in other ways. And there's some really basic numbers. If you're moving from a rural area and you're going to a larger city and you're going to work in a bank as a teller or a truck driver, you're going to make 3 or 4 times the amount of money you would make as a farmer picking coffee and owning your own farm. So, pretty easy to do the math and figure out that's not sustainable at all. There are only, and this is not so much about Cup of Excellence, but there are only a couple countries that I've been to where I've seen some really different trends going on, and Thailand is the one that really opened my eyes because you saw a generation of kids that left the rural areas of Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai to go to Bangkok to make money, and it wasn't going well, and they've come back to their families' farms, and the internal market is really, really good in Thailand, and there's obviously a lot of tourism, there's a lot of other abilities to sell coffees within Thailand, and so the internal market is really, really good. Farmers get great prices, and I'm seeing 19, 20, 25-year-old kids that are like going back to their farms and saying, no, this is completely viable. They want to be back there, and they're making good money, and they're proud to be working with their family on a family business, and they're entrepreneurs, and so that's the dynamic that we kind of need to see happen. But if there's shame around it because people feel that they're not getting adequate, livelihood, then it's a cultural divide. It creates some really substantial problems to try to navigate. So, I think getting back to the kind of the idea of competitions or auction systems, it certainly recognizes the ability for producers to do better and be recognized for that, and hopefully find some linkage, out of some of the cycles that they're currently facing. So,
absolutely. I mean, and it sounds like, even though I feel like all of your responses have been so diverse, and the sentiment is that we can't continue. Why should anyone continue? And Mike, you and I had a really interesting conversation about this particular thing, and you have a philosophical response to how we should maybe shift our thinking in the relationship between importer, producer, and roaster.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to speak on this kind of thing because I think it involves like a shift on how we think of equity and in a globalization context. I think that what's particularly challenging when talking about sustainability in coffee for baristas and roasters and green buyers is identifying metrics. Sustainability metrics of any kind. Why we latched on to cost of production with our company was because we saw it as that metric. That we could sit and really just go down the rabbit hole of social theory and the agony of globalization and consumerism and this, but I think that by kind of latching onto cost of production, it's a very attainable thing. It's something that you can actually, it's an accessible thing. It's a very real, impactful thing. Hopefully a metric.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, and so I guess to continue that question with Christy, because you have worked together as the importer with Mike, what would you say if there is a model that functions best between producer, roaster, and importer? What does that relationship look like for any roasters in the room or importers or producers? Maybe that'd be cool. What do you think?
Well, I think what we need in order to have a good relationship is, and for this project to work, is like in our case, Andres, Mike, and myself, we had the same goal. We knew what we wanted. We knew what we wanted to reach. And the second most important thing is also transparency. You know, transparency is a big thing that leads to trust. We were open about what we needed in order to work. What was that, last year? January of 2016, we went, all of us, Bobby, my husband, and Mike and I myself, we went to visit Andres from Pachuc. And when we were talking about cost of production, Andres was so transparent on his needs, on his reality to us. It was actually refreshing because it wasn't like a visit that you said, oh, so beautiful, oh, the cherries, oh, everything's perfect. It was amazingly beautiful. But it was also very insightful to see his point of view and his struggles that he goes through every single day. Not just about producing, also his finance problems, all those problems that we don't see when we buy a cup of coffee, we don't see that, do we? No. So it was really good. So when we started talking, that was the key element, transparency and being honest about each other. There are so many preconceptions out there, and I've been in coffee for about 3 years now, and when I started learning a lot about coffee, these preconceptions didn't help. So when we started the project together, it was very good because I got to see what your struggles were, what the producer's struggles were, what my struggles were being at that moment. So it helps us reach the conclusion, okay, in order for us to keep working on a long-term relationship and on a sustainable relationship, what do we need? That was perfect. So I think honesty and transparency are the most important things that you can have in order to work together. And for the roasters in the room, no matter where you source your coffee from, just get more involved. No matter if you have middlemen, brokers, go directly to the producers, get more involved, know and learn more of it, and actually see if what you guys are paying actually covers that cost, but more. Because, there's things that aren't covering cost of production, like education, like food, like housing, those things. It's like any business. How can we continue if our business is not being profitable?
I'm so glad that you brought up transparency because based on your conversation with me, Emily, last Friday, I don't want to keep reducing Ethiopia to being different, but it just is. The culture there is different. The conversations look different. Can you tell us a little bit more, because you've been trying to broach this subject for a while. What does that look like?
Oh, lots of awkward conversations.
Well, this is based purely, I know that obviously your experience is going to be different than theirs, but the goal is the same. We all are trying to pay a fair price. So I do want to give you license to be honest on your experience.
Thank you. Yeah. It's interesting because I was a music teacher before I got into coffee 10 years ago. I wouldn't have thought myself qualified to be in a role that is so tied to metrics, economics, and these hard discussions. But I also grew up with my parents scraping by to make a living, self-employed, and I helped them. I was homeschooled. I went to work with my dad, swept the floors of his carpenter shop, did the books. So it turns out I was really well qualified as a soul to be in this conversation. And I think we're in a really important time. Yeah. I see this as a tipping point in our industry, in not just the industry, but all that we touch. Most of these countries count coffee as one of their primary exports. However you look at it, coffee exerts an enormous financial pull. And we also know a lot of coffee that's being traded isn't being really good for everybody that handles it. And there's the overarching question of, are we still going to have coffee in 20 or 30 years? Both from an environmental and also from a financial standpoint. So this is where I do think this concept of transparency, although these words kind of get cliched, transparency, sustainability. I almost laugh when I say the word sustainability because it's become such a cliche. And it was a cliche before I even seriously started, to me, before I even seriously started thinking about what sustainability was. But it's a real concept that really matters. All of us are here because we care about this, and honestly, our industry, we need to be focused more and more on these conversations. So, I also want to give my thoughts on your question about an ideal relationship between producers, importers,
Please.
unique stakeholders like the Alliance for Coffee Excellence, roasters, consumers. And you brought up the concept of trust. I actually was just interviewing on this topic, and it caused me to really articulate trust. Here's a scenario in which I felt like my trust was somewhat violated. We were in Ethiopia. I traveled with my daughter. My husband and I are business partners. We have Ethiopian partners. It's a family thing. And we are really trusting people to treat us with respect. We're putting our most precious thing, really, we're in a developing country, and we spend a lot of time calling ahead and saying, hey, any protests lately? Everything okay? Are the roads clear? And usually people are really forthcoming with information and help us navigate this. We were recently in Kefa. This happened about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And we spent hours and hours and hours in the house of a partner that we've worked with for a few years. And at one point we even looked at him and said, hey, any protests? Anything going on? And he looked us in the eye and said no. And the next morning, thousands and thousands and thousands of people mobbed right outside our hotel. The roads were blocked for 50 kilometers around the city of Bonga. And we realized this guy was one of the organizers. He knew what was going down. The best interpretation of that is just that he didn't think it was relevant to us, but it brings me to this question of trust. Because I think a lot of us are motivated in coffee by an emotional connection, or that's what we're hunting for. Some of us maybe got into it through emotion, some of us are seeking for it, and a few really amazing people are less driven by emotion and have other motivations. That's amazing as well. What does trust mean? And as one of the most important parts of this conversation, what does it mean between an importer and a supplier, or an importer and a roaster? I think it goes down to this: willingness to be transparent about the challenges we face and also about our costs and profits. That's a big topic because it opens us up for misinterpretation and for people to see what we're doing as insufficient or unethical or whatever, because everybody has their own personal interpretations on even profit margins. And then roasters to importers. I want to see more of this from roasters. I want to see transparency reports all the way through the chain. I'm preparing for 2019 to produce a transparency report for every pound of coffee we sell, all the lots, broken down in percentages for cost of production, et cetera. So I would like to see this more. As an importer, this helps me develop trust and a good working relationship with roasters because I see them as mutually invested. We need mutual investment and mutual reward. And we need people who drink coffee to be asking these questions and really asking themselves, how do my buying habits tally with what I'm learning about the ethics of coffee? Because it's ethical. It's an ethical question we're talking about here. Are we willfully ignorant? If we're not, good. We're asking the right questions. Cool. What are we going to do about it? That's the ideal relationship. A willingness to do something about it, a willingness to ask questions, and a willingness to develop trust and honesty, as you said, between everybody. And it's not that easy. It's pretty complex. But that was my answer.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know it was also a recent thing, so I'm sure it feels extra heavy right now, too.
It's a good example of the intensity of these conversations.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we would be lying if we said, oh yeah, pursue all of your relationships with 100% transparency. It's going to go great. Obviously, humans are going to let each other down. And so yeah, just be really wise about who you partner with. Mike and Chrissy are a great pair. So if you want to ask them how their partnership works, that would probably be a great test study.
I know I just talked a lot, but can I make one more
Oh,
point?
yeah.
I think systems are really important here. So we don't need to just talk about transparency, but we actually need to develop systems to ensure that the right behavior throughout our supply chain is taken. So, if we incentivize people to do the right thing, they're more likely to do it. If we ask them questions, hey, did you do this the way we discussed? Can you document it for me? We're more likely to get the right results.
That's super helpful. I would love to move on to the next question because it's going to be my favorite, I think. So the four of you are in positions of massive influence. What are you doing in your sphere of influence or in your position about this particular topic? Darren, can we start with you?
Sure. Well, maybe a little bit about what I mentioned earlier about the program itself and what we're doing. The visibility is at the core. Discover and reward excellence is essentially what we're trying to do. And we're also trying to be really clear with the partners that we work with in the countries that we have coordinators in every country. And that's back to the trust and the verification and delivering on the promise. And that's what, the program is entirely transparent in what it divulges and the costing, the auction proceeds, where everything is going. We call it liquidation because we're liquidating all of the coffees that have been sold and then giving those reports back to the country organizers. They're sharing it with the producers. The producers can see exactly what was purchased online, just like anybody else can see. I think the program is, it's sustaining itself and it's doing what it needs to do. But I see what's happening in terms of the crisis and feel that we need to broaden the scope of work that we're doing and the ability to trade beyond the competition coffees. And it's something that I'd really like for us to do. So it's more of a vision or a goal to grow into more coffees being sold through a program where there's a premium built in through the quality component that we provide through all of the competitions that we run. And I won't go into detail about the program because it's fairly in depth. But I will say, philosophically, the program is really recognizing that if we don't have a quality component and producers improving and getting better at what they're doing, there's very little chance of really moving the needle. And this is something that, has been discussed a lot in the industry. Are we actually moving the needle? And with certification specifically, when we talk about Rainforest Alliance or UTS and fair trade, and it's a hotly debated issue. I mean, there are many people who really have done their own work. Counterculture was one of them that looked at it, and Kim Elena, when she was with them, and looking at their situation and saying, we're not moving the needle, we're not. So, but they're aware of what they need to do, and I think that's the thing is continuing to grow on the programs that are actually incentivizing producers, and I think our program has made a very good attempt to do that, and some countries fare better than others. There are certain markets that are more open to certain coffees. One thing that I have found that's been very interesting in working with, we work in markets all around the world, specifically Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, China, Australia. China's emerging. And many buyers will tell me, we love your program, but we can't work in certain countries because we don't feel safe. Which which kind of goes back to your experience with the 300,000 people that were protesting in Bonga, and they were protesting coffee prices. That's what's going on right now. That's what's been going on in Colombia. Recently, there have been protests, and there have been letters written from many associations telling roasters, you need to wake up and support us because we're actually not making it. And these things are really, really critical. This isn't just it's not a philosophical conversation. It's actually a business conversation that has to happen. And so, I think what I would like to see is more programs that are very specific to improving and helping people on quality. But not everybody can grow great quality coffee. Not everybody has 1,900 meter abilities. So, that's something that is outside of the framework of what we're able to do. But there must be other components and other programs that can start to actually look at more, I won't say commercial quality coffees, but but certainly coffees that deserve a home somewhere, but should be getting much higher prices than what they're getting. It's just overall it's undervalued. So, our mechanism is just one small piece to try to explore the idea of what probably I would say direct trade was supposed to be. I mean, before we were really talking about direct trade, our organization was already doing that. We were directly selling coffee at a fixed price, whatever the auction would bear. And we just need more of that instead of the commodification in the C market, which is what's dominating the whole conversation. Is dominated by that fact that we're all kind of stuck with it. And the only way to combat that is to develop more direct trade models. It's not the only model, but it's certainly it should be a multi-channeled model. But right now, I think we mostly understand that it's just a conversation directly with the producer and establishing a base price or a multi-year price if you believe in the relationship. So, all those things I think have been key and have been key to our program and our growth and the work that we're doing. So I hope that answers the question.
Oh, that does. Well, and actually, I know how complex what the Cup of Excellence does and how far spread your arm reaches. So I appreciate you making that concise, because I'm sure you could have talked for hours on that. And I do think that, well, yes, I mean, and I do think that the sentiment is there that is massive as your reach is, that you can't do it alone. And that we all need to figure out what our power is in our position to do what we can. And Mike, would you be able to answer the same question? Mike is a roaster also in Portland, just like us, which could be seen as competition, but honestly, I'm rooting so hard for Junior's Roasted Coffee because of what you guys are doing as the only model of your coffee buying program. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for having us here.
We're so stoked.
So within my sphere of influence, I guess as a business owner, what I've been able to do is start a cost of production project, a very collaborative project that started when I was in grad school. And I was leaving academia to grow our roasting company in Portland. But as I was leaving, I was starting a conversation around cost of production with someone that worked with the Sustainability Council for the Specialty Coffee Association, Chad Trevick, who just planted this seed of cost of production. I thought, wow, well, what I'm looking at right now is all very interesting, but geez, I want to bring in this idea, this cost of production idea, into what I'm looking at. This is so interesting to me. As we moved back to Portland to grow a roasting company, I thought, if we're going to do this, if I'm going to leave school and leave these research projects, I want to try and incorporate that into the way that we buy coffee. So what we did, I serendipitously met Christy. I worked for a coffee school in Portland, and she was taking a class there, and she said, hey, I'm starting a Guatemalan importing business. I said, hey, I'm growing my roasting company, we should talk. So on the last day of classes, over probably a veggie burger and a beer, we started talking about sustainability, and ultimately, this cost of production idea, this project came up, and I thought, and we were both really into it. Christy was totally dedicated to transparency, and so when I went out to Guatemala, Christy she had a couple of producers in mind who were interested in collaborating on a cost of production project, whatever that would look like. So we started talking with Andres Fasen, who owns Santo Tomas Pachu farm near Atitlan, Guatemala. And we started talking quite passionately about the sea market, sustainability, yada, yada, yada. Coffee prices are too low, particularly Andres was sharing stories about working with larger companies who ultimately wouldn't cover cost to produce. And so I said, thought, hey, do you want to partner up? Do you want to work together and communicate this to the coffee industry and to our customers? So we worked with Andres, who happened to keep meticulous cost of production records. And over the next few months, we started texting, WhatsApping, Skyping, emailing, and sharing spreadsheets and looking at this cost of production data. So facilitated by Christy. We narrowed down a cost to produce. It costs Santo Tomas Pachu $2.87 per pound green to produce. And just as a friendly reminder, that C price was below $1 in August, 96 cents or so, or possibly. And it cost them $2.87. So we identified this cost to produce, and Christy paid obviously over that cost to produce. We started looking at the spreadsheet with Andres and saw that even above the cost to produce, they weren't breaking even. We started looking at things like agricultural loans and interest rates. And it wasn't until $4 a pound green that they were able to break even. We could start asking questions about efficiency, because that's ultimately where the conversation goes, oftentimes in a specialty coffee association context. But it wasn't until $4 a pound that Pachu would break even. So we started at $4 a pound green. So we narrowed down this price for this coffee. And before this too, we had received samples from Andres and Cupped and agreed to work with them regardless of where the project went. So we purchased coffee from Pachu. That was kind of the first step, was as a green buyer, as a business owner, as a green buyer, was identifying this cost to produce and basing our premium on that. As a business owner too, kind of promoting this idea was the next step. So we put the C market price, the cost to produce, and what we paid on the coffee bag label as one way of engaging with folks. Because communicating this idea is tough. It's so tough. It's not as easy as just talking about fair trade over the counter in 10 seconds with a customer. It's not that easy. There's no elevator pitch for cost of production yet. Really, really trying. But so we tried with the label as one way of engaging. We released a comic book that talks about the C market. Thanks. And talks about the project, what we did. So just another way for folks to engage with this idea while they're even waiting in line in the shop. We give it out to wholesale customers. Had an event in November where we invited the coffee community and non-coffee community to just talk about this topic. And we're going to release some transparency reports around the green coffee price and detailing the cost to produce and our own cost of goods as roasters. And talk about that with our own customers. As a trainer, finally, is my influence. What I'm doing is training staff to talk about it, to actually just try and engage with people. We changed our Wi-Fi password to ask me about cost of production.
So thorough.
It was Karen's idea.
All uppercase?
It's all lowercase. Yeah, it's all lowercase. But is just another way of engaging. And so every time, and it's our staff that have to answer that question. So we've had a couple of trainings where we talk about this and just train how to talk about this. It's ongoing. It's a really difficult thing. It's been interesting to see customers engage, but leaving school to come do this, I saw academia. I don't know if there are any students in the room, but I saw academia as like a form of activism. And so when I left that, I wanted to continue to push. It's really hard for me to answer the mutually beneficial question, like, what is a mutually beneficial relationship from roaster, importer, and producer? Because I think, that gets back to the win-win. I think that we as roasters have been winning for a long time. And so I think that it's, and that could be a philosophical topic too, but I think it does get down to business and those transactions. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was if you're anywhere, I'm hearing all sorts of, seriously, if you're anywhere in the industry, you just got a tip for how you can apply it to your business. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And Christy, I know your project with Mike is one and the same. Do you have anything to add for your sphere of influence, what you're doing for this topic?
Well, when we talked about it, you asked me to share a little bit of how TerraNegra started. So let me tell you a little bit of how we started and came to be. At the end of 2015, my husband over there and I started talking about the possibility of opening a Guatemalan-themed coffee shop in Bend, our future home for next year. And at that time, I didn't know anything about coffee at all. Didn't drink it, nothing. So I said, well, I have the opportunity to start that. I was working part-time at that moment, and before we do that, I want to learn about it and see if I like it. Because, being in a business where you don't like what you do, it sucks. So I started learning about it, started the barista classes in a cafe in Guatemala, and from that first class, I was hooked. I was like, okay, this is it. This is where I want to do, where I want to be. And I started learning what even hyped with caffeine really felt like, Every day I was like that. It was so cool. So when I finished those classes, I found this program, what Mike talked about, at the American and Barista Coffee School in Portland. And that is where we met, Mike, and so many wonderful people in coffee that started teaching me a lot. I've encountered so many amazing people, like my fellow panelists, that when we first met, it was you start a conversation about coffee, and they want to teach you so many things and their experiences, and they open up to themselves to you, which is very humble and, very inspiring. So to get back to the story, after the classes finished, we started talking with Mike about sustainability and transparency, and it was, okay, this is where I want to go. So the idea of the coffee shop became just an idea, and TerraNegra became our goal. And when I went back to Guatemala, I started getting immersed in all this and all of the subjects, learning all the logistics, meeting so many amazing producers, going to farms. I started a new degree in exporting coffee as well, and it was just amazing. And at that moment, when we started talking about sustainability with Mike, I couldn't say anything, because I was learning from scratch at that moment. But I knew that was what we wanted. And so after this, we founded TerraNegra in 2016, July. And even though we've had some rough patches, because any business goes through them, what motivates us to keep going is the people. Not just on this side, but at origin. I think that relates to you, because importers, I think, have the best job in coffee. Because you get to meet the producers and grow with them, and also meet roasters and coffee shop owners and grow with them as well. And they share with you what their struggles are, their stories, their hearts. So I think we did good, And so what inspired us to do this is we wanted TerraNegra to have these values. We were focused on this to be in a sustainable industry. So we wanted to be different from the normal way of broking is not a good word, of trading, because it was just not being sustainable. I mean, we don't even see the market price, the C market price. We don't know it because we don't base our prices on those. And so even though we've had a slow growth because that became our model, it was all worth it because we know that we can make a change. And if we can inspire other people to follow through, and it's going to be great. I mean, what we did with Mike, you were the leading on that project. It inspired us to go through that. Even though I didn't know anything about coffee, you inspired me to do it. And Andres inspired me to follow through that as well. And so I think that's it. Having the opportunity to work on these projects like the Costa production, it was our first project with Mike, and we are going to keep doing that with our other close producer relationships we have. And like in Dapper and Wise, we're just starting to do the same with Chespi, El Rosario, and Vizcaya. If you haven't tried it, you should. It's really good. So good. And so having that opportunity to create awareness and set a spark to a long-lasting industry, it's what motivates us to keep going. So I hope it motivates you guys to whatever you can do. There's not a rule to follow on how to do this right. Just go with your heart and believe and take that first step. That is the most important thing. And not be scared of change. We have to change. We have to do something different. Our past generations did things in a certain way that might have worked for them, but today we cannot follow that. We have to change. There's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Christy. That's so true. If you're interested in this topic because it's what everybody's talking about right now, when push comes to shove, we're all going to make decisions for ourselves. But if it's just genuinely who we are and what we believe business is about, that it needs to be fair for everyone, like your business, Christy, it's 100% always moving towards being fair for everyone in your relationships. So thank you so much. And then same question to you, Emily.
I can't credit the quote here, but someone, I think it might have been Archimedes, said, "Give me the right lever and I can move the world." Notwithstanding that it's a very difficult thing about moving a globe without anything to set it on, my goal is to be part of the lever that moves this world that we operate in. My husband/business partner, Michael, and I met in coffee 10 years ago. We were both baristas. After a very rocky first meeting, we fell hard for each other, and we began to talk about the future. And it was immediately clear to us when we compared notes what that should look like. The details, we had no idea. But this, being part of this movement that we could see shaping toward better distribution of profits, higher quality of life for everybody. Granted, these are huge topics. Everybody has to tackle them in different ways. I think every one of us here and all of us here are tackling those in different ways. We need all these voices to join together to create a collective hello to wake up the people who do have the most power in this industry. My personal goal is to just keep talking about it, to keep matching action with words. It's good to talk about this stuff, but what are we doing about it? How can we come up with new ways to incentivize people to do a better job and get more for their coffee? How can we incentivize all of us to talk more about this? This is something I'm pondering right now. I don't have the answers necessarily, but I do think that the question of incentives is really important. So I'm going to keep tackling this. And if anybody has thoughts centered around that, please talk to me. So what am I doing? I recently helped co-found a coffee importing company centered on Ethiopian coffee. We are majority Ethiopian owned. We have a coffee farmer and a coffee process control person as co-founders. We are working with relationships that are real. Like, you know how marriage is if you're married, or, you know, a really intense relationship of any kind, including roommates. Relationships are challenging. We're committed to showing up, continuing to ask questions, being honest about what we think and the ramifications of certain actions on our business, and asking other people to do the same thing, both producers we work with and the roasters we work with. You made such a wonderful point. It's a huge privilege to be situated here with a foot in both worlds. For me, going back and forth between Ethiopia and the US, wow. Everywhere I go, my heart's left somewhere else. Everywhere I go, I have another question to ask and another person to learn from. This is the core of the coffee industry, and this is the kind of growing willingness to change that will inspire us all to be part of this change. So, me personally, I'm going to write a lot more articles. I want to speak more privately and publicly about these issues. I want to learn more. I want to start showing up more as a student of these questions, and really, underlying all of this is keep asking these questions of our producer and partners and keep answering honestly. For example, it's been kind of a question for us, given the way that the legislation is in Ethiopia. It's very, 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 very difficult, A, to figure out cost of production, and B, it's really complex to work with people individually. Legislation has shifted to allow us to deal directly with our partners in the sense that we can ally with local exporting companies to purchase coffees that we've chosen in advance, which is huge. We can follow the transparency trail there instead of just buying the coffees at auction, total pig in a poke, maybe, you know, getting a note or a text from the producer the day before and being like, hey, it's going as a Guji grade 1. If there are no other Guji grade 1s on the floor that day, you might be able to get my coffee, but you don't know until you've purchased it. So anyway, we've got these things going for us, but it's still really challenging. And it's hard for us to talk about how to offer premiums because we don't get to purchase this coffee directly ourselves as foreigners or as a foreign-based company from the producer. How do we get around that? One thing we're experimenting with this year is, you know, we work with our trusted export partners and with the producer at the same time to negotiate the good price for everybody, for FOB costs. So that includes the producer saying, hey, I really need this much per pound, and the exporter saying, well, I need this much per pound. And we're like, okay, cool. We can sell it for this. Here's our spread to bring it in. This is what we need. Can we talk together? So we do that. But then separately, we're actually privately handing premiums to the producers if they do and document the process requests that we make of them. The first step is the acquisition and the sorting of the cherries. You know, everybody knows we need only red cherries, but that is so much harder in reality than it is to talk about. There's that. We ask people to float their coffees as they go in through the pulp before they get pulped so that the defects rise to the surface, and it's a lot of extra work, extra sorting. If they can verify this for us, whether through a documentation written down at the time of the lot or through a photo, we give them a predetermined premium, just privately. It's, we're paying full price that's registered through the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, and we're also just offering a service fee to these people. Additionally, we have process experiments we're doing. And if they do those and document them like we've requested, they get another preset premium. And then the last one is we have a quality minimum, which if they've done everything we've been asking, they should definitely reach. If the coffee's cupped at this quality minimum, which we establish based on the region and the quality of the coffees and what we can expect, they get another premium. We're just trying this out this year. the three of us were driving between Guji and Awasa, and we came up with this in an afternoon. And we called all of our producers, and we said, so here's what we want to do to additionally reward you for the work you've been doing. Everybody was so excited because that's actually quite a lot of profit for them. That's like an additional 15 to 20% margin, depending on who it is. It's really exciting. We'll see how this goes. But what I'm getting at is I and my co-founders and the people that we work with are committed to continuing to grow the options, the conversation, and the sphere of influence that we all have. So that, like this huge, throw a stone in the middle of a pond and you're going to get ripples all the way out to the edges. I want to be part of that stone. I don't have aspirations to be the entire stone, but together we can make a huge splash.
You are a writer. That was beautiful, that finish. And so for any of you who are note takers, this is the last question before Q&A. If you guys could just give bullet points. So for any roasters that are in the room, importers, or just us as coffee consumers in general. We all drink coffee, I'm assuming, because we're here. But what can we do? Why don't we start with you?
Pay more for coffee. And get the consumers to understand why they need to pay more for coffee. I think that.
And when we say more for coffee on the consumer end, what is the margin that we're talking about here?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a quality question because depending on what you're going to be consuming and the quality that it has, then there's an price discovery, I guess. So I don't really know how to answer that in terms
Sorry,
of...
I did just bring that on you.
Yeah, no. But I mean, if we all agree that it's an undervalued product, then that means that we have to start somewhere. If we start at the beginning of the supply chain, that, like what Emily's saying, that's the ripple effect, right? But then all the way back the other way to the consumer side, the consumers, I can tell you honestly, having worked for a retail company like Whole Foods for a long time, they have no clue. And there's a race to the bottom. So I think bullet point wise, we need to have higher prices across the whole supply chain. That's the biggest thing. How we do it is going to be more than we can tackle tonight. But I think that's one thing. And then the other bullet point is education, just knowledge. Knowledge sharing is so important because people. If you see an amazing documentary and you learn about a particular event or something that's established in that film, there's all this stuff that starts to kind of information transfer, and then that leads to more discovery and information. And so I think teaching, being willing to what Mike's doing, that program is being willing to basically tell people you're going to have to pay a higher price for Andres' coffee, and here's why, And so I think those two are probably. My biggest points, but also, coffee's a global product, unlike very few other products in the world. So learn about the world, the economics of other countries, the issues that are going on in Ethiopia or in Yemen right now, which is incredibly difficult for producers in the middle of a civil war. Learn about what's going on in the supply chain because it will motivate you to do different things. So I think education and price discovery are my two. I'll leave it at that.
That's awesome. Yeah, if you guys are writing this down, you maybe could be writing this down. Mike, your turn.
Wow, those were solid, Darren. I think that educating yourself about the system you're operating within, a big one. Some more bullet points. Let's be honest about the way we do business. Being transparent about financials, I think it's scary as a business owner to be vulnerable. But the more people around you doing it, it doesn't seem so bad.
Some of us have to start this thing.
Yeah. I think even just being honest about the way that we receive coffee, because we have one coffee that we carry that is, cost of production covered. Other coffees we actually just started calling limited run, just to see what conversations that starts. People are like, oh, wait, is this going to go away? How long do you have this coffee? I'm like, well, we're not really sure if we're going to work with it next year, because we bought it from an importer. People are like, wait, what? What's an importer? Even those conversations are very real in the cafe and can start, I think, some important sustainability conversations. I think as roasters, too, I have just been going back and forth with this, with quality and the specialty industry. I think as roasters, I think that we should consider more than the score of coffee. And I think that at least like in kind of like a bubble, we'll call Portland a bubble. In Portland, there's this fixation on just 86s, 87s, 88s, and I think that that's great because those are the coffees, I want to drink those coffees. But I think that so much so that I think that we end up missing this bigger picture that specialty coffee is a niche. We are just a sliver of the reality. So I think that kind of looking beyond those higher scores, let's see. Investing in staff education, business owners. It's so important that staff understand this stuff and are able to talk about it and comfortably. I was very well trained to talk about direct trade in 30 seconds or less. Stumptown Coffee Roasters. But I think that to be able to talk about this thing in 30 seconds or less is really hard. So I think it's important to keep staff excited. I think that it's really cool to see staff at our shop, honestly, more excited about cost of production than like reverse osmosis water. That's really, that excites me. So I would just say staff education. Lastly, find importers that you trust. Trust is humongous, and it's these cost of production relationships can't just be serendipitous. It's work. It's asking a lot of questions of importers and sitting down over a beer and just talking about sustainability and transparency, and then receiving samples and cupping the coffee. And if you like it, let's start that conversation and see what questions were answered. But I would say that cost of production is so contextual. What an understatement. But these projects, it's very hard to have a blueprint for them. And so I'm just going to put that there.
Thank you so much. I feel like throughout this entire conversation, you've been giving tidbits of advice, and I'm sure it'll come up in your conversations if you work in the cafe or roaster or even just as coffee consumers in general. So thank you so much. And Christy, what about you?
Thank you. Actually, Darren said my 2 bullet points, so I'm trying to say it differently. Well, the first one is educate ourselves. I feel like a newbie against all these wonderful panelists here. But I actually started learning so much and immersing myself in what coffee meant. It's not just a drink. It's so much behind it. It's so many people's lives behind it that depend on it. So I think first, like you said, educate ourselves on what we are getting, what coffee consists of. It's not just a drink, it's people. It's amazing. It's, I think, one of the biggest industries that gets so many people together. And also understand that when the price per cup goes up, say 50 cents, for example, understand that what you're actually contributing is not, it's more expensive. You're actually giving jobs. You're giving a chance for children to get a good education at home, at origin. You're putting food on the table. You are doing so much more with that just 50 cents. If we are willing to pay, I don't know how much a beer is, $6 or $10 or I don't know, or a glass of wine. if we're willing to pay that much money into that glass of wine, we should do it with the coffee, because it takes so much amount of effort to produce, and not just to produce, to export it, to sort it, to import it, to distribute it. There's so many steps that involve getting that cup of coffee in front of you there. So, I don't know, just understand and be open. If the cost of coffee per cup goes up, understand that it's not a hassle, it's a blessing that you're giving other people as well. And another thing that it's important is that think about quality, like what you said. We are so focused on paying for quality numbers, SCA numbers, 87, okay, cool, I'm gonna pay for that. But what happens with the less graded coffees, like the 80s or 78s? Did you know that 80% of the farms in the coast that are not high elevation in Guatemala have closed? They just not running anymore. People have sold them. This has led to crime or migration, and it's amazing what happens to that coffee. Because Andres, for example, it costs him the same to produce the high quality coffee that is served today at Gilder, and the coffee that he isn't able to sell for that amount of money. What happens to that? That is where he loses money. He's actually getting red numbers every time because, it's a hassle. And when we talked with Andres a few months ago about it, and he's like, I need to sell this coffee. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to help you. But we all need to work together in order, not just one part of the chain. We all depend on each other. If one is struggling, we all struggle. That's basically it. We're a chain. That's what makes coffee special, because it's a teamwork, not just one person, two persons. I cannot do what I'm doing alone. I have so many people in the back, even though they're not under the company, but what they're doing for us with TerraNegra, like Mike, Emily, all of you guys are actually contributing to what we do, make it better. So I think that's it.
Man, count on Christy to connect the heart and the head, huh? Jeez. And last but not least, Emily, what can we do, coffee consumers?
There's a clarity of purpose that comes from having your actions aligned with your thought processes and aligned with your ethics. We're all in search of this, I think. And this is a personal benefit we can gain when we examine our coffee buying purchases, whether that's green coffee or roasted coffee, or in my case, Gemfell or parchment. So my advice is examine, ask questions. There is no way to, as a single person, encompass the solution here, I don't think. I'd love to see that. I might hail this person as a messiah. But together, we bring these different perspectives to the table. So I encourage you, and I also admonish myself, to wake up in the morning and say, if you're, a coffee professional, it makes more sense to put this much thought process into it. If you're not, just think about it when you go in to think about, when you're getting coffee. But if you're a coffee professional, you're probably thinking a lot about coffee. Into this thought process about coffee, ask yourself, what do I believe is right in business? Are the companies and people I'm allying with acting this way? Am I acting this way? And keep asking those questions. Our behavior will change to align with, I think, core values most of us share. And this is how the change will spread. And my last bullet point is to speak up. If you see, we're all learning here. It's a new era of beginning to speak up about abuse. There are lots of abuses to speak up about. Because abuse is part of human nature. This is the way we have evolved as society. And so the powerful oppress the less powerful. The strong sit on and bully the weak. Sometimes by the simple fact of their existence, because of the way that the societies are set up in a capitalistic way. So, when we see these abuses, what are we doing about them? When I see a coffee producer. Limited sphere of influence here. I work in Ethiopian coffee. I have specific producers who I work with. I have specific roaster customers who I'm privileged to work with. So, how can I stand up for every single one of us, the stakeholders? And these stakeholders include the quality cuppers at the CLU, the Central Liquoring Unit in Ethiopia, that have to approve every lot for export. The stakeholders include the women who aren't considered for land ownership or farm ownership or any of this stuff. They do all the menial labor. They are not usually stakeholders, or shareholders, I should say. It also, we've got export people. We've got people who labor hand-picking on a floor. 80 women lined up picking defects off of a table after the visual sorting has gone through. They deserve a voice too. How are we going to give it to them? I'm not sure, except I personally am going to keep speaking on their behalf and giving them premiums when they work on our coffee because they're doing more work, because we ask for more. We've got people who deal with brokerage. We've got people who organize competitions. The Alliance for Coffee Excellence, 19 years running. The direct trade movement as it stands wouldn't exist if it weren't for the Alliance for Coffee Excellence. Wow. ACE has been speaking for all the stakeholders in coffee for 19 years. This is a great example. So, to bring it back around, I encourage all of us to ask the questions of how we are doing good with our purchases and shift our behavior accordingly, even if just a single degree at a time. And to speak up, even if it puts us in awkward conversations, when we see abuses happening in the coffee supply chain. All the way from drinking your coffee down to picking it off the trees.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple minutes for Q&A. Hi, friend. Brandon has a microphone. Does anybody have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists while we're here? Just raise your hand and we will bring the microphone to you. And if you have a person that you're particularly directing it at, just go ahead.
No, I guess this is for everybody, and so forgive me if it's a naive question, but I like your idea about giving them premiums, but I guess my fear would be that the other people along the chain would see that as kind of bypassing them. So like the farmers and the roasters, I think they're committed to doing this, but how do you get everybody in between committed?
That's a fantastic question. I'm sure everybody else here wants to weigh in too, so I'll make it really short. I don't think we can please everybody, but we do have to look at the best we can, given that there's so little transparency about business models here. Profit margins goes back to cost of production. If an export company has 6% profit margins, who are they to argue? Really? Producer who's not making break even? I am unafraid to hand a premium to this person for their hard work. Now, getting there, this conversation, that's harder because how can I verify this profit margin situation? But yeah, we're going to step on a lot of toes. And especially a lot of coffee producing countries have a ton of corruption. So people expect handouts, people expect inordinate amounts of payment. In Ethiopia, it's just everywhere. And there's also a huge ego trip about how much money you make in coffee. So it's a really complex question. There's no really good answer except that we have to do our best and deal with the consequences. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think the disparity in profits across the chain from producer to the end where we're at tonight, sitting here, it's very disproportionate already. And you have tools that exporters and importers have in terms of risk management and hedging, and and farmers in Brazil can hedge their own risk. And it's a very complex way of basically saying that they're finding ways to be profitable with what typically is about a 2% margin for an importer, and that number can vary quite a bit. But there's also a lot of other access to credit that other people within the supply chain have that producers often don't have, or they have it at high interest rates, like 30% interest rates in Guatemala. It's not uncommon for a farmer to get a loan, and that's not a loan. That's a proposition for poverty, and often that's what ends up happening is it creates that disparity. So I think it's not so much equalizing, but it's redistribution of things that have been abusive, to use that word. So I think it wouldn't necessarily rile people too much. It definitely would. But I also, if you think about it through the lens of, if there's no coffee, none of the other people in the supply chain will exist, and the coffee is from the farmers. So the farmers should be getting really the highest margin. If we were really going to stack the deck the right way, it's completely the opposite, and there just needs to be a reallocation of the margins, and yeah, I think that's to answer. It's a great question. Yeah. It's a really, really great question. So,
any other takers on that? No. Everybody feels good about those responses. Thank you so much for that awesome question. Anybody else have questions for our panel? Ryan.
Hi, thanks. Christy and Mike, I know it's still new and in the making, but I'm just curious, at the end of the day, to the end user, how much did your cost of production product or project increase the price of the coffee to the retail customer?
That's a great question. So we worked with this coffee the first year as we were getting the project going, and second year when we tracked down this cost to produce, figured out our premium, we realized that if we're going to put this out into the world, we've got to talk about our own costs. And what a slippery slope that is. So we started breaking down our own costs, and down to square footage of the roaster in the cafe. As it turned out, the price that we settled on was the same price that we charged the first year. And so this report that we're releasing at the end of the month, hopefully at the end of the month, is going to break down these costs. So what we're charging for a 12-ounce bag is $18. Which, yeah, I think that when we look around at, I don't know, in Portland, Seattle, or even New York, I think that roasters kind of like coming up with latte prices. We're like, oh, well, geez, what are they charging for most of their Latin Centrals? Let's just set the price there. I think that for me, it was a reality check. I think that what we're going to be doing is doing this with all of our coffees, but also just being ready to talk about it. Because I'm ready for those questions. Well, geez, I see labor here is this high. What's the deal? So, we're gonna be ready for that one. But yeah, it was enlightening to do, and we're ready to have that be part of the conversation as well. Does that answer your question?
I can't wait to see that. You are a brave man.
And I do think we have time for about one more question, if anybody. Brandon in the back.
Yeah, I was just curious on hearing some of your thoughts from maybe like a barista perspective. So some of the ideas put forth near the end were ask questions and speak up, and there was a stressing on education and kind of starting that conversation of like retail or coffee being more expensive. And then there was even a line about keep the barista excited. But in my experience, it's been like, well, how do you even keep the barista, let alone excited?
Ooh, yeah.
Like I have the privilege of working in a job I feel very sustainable in, but the previous ones I've not felt very sustainable. So how do I sustain that conversation when roasting companies maybe aren't even treating their employees the best they should. I've worked for 3 different roasting companies, then a multi-roaster, then another roasting company before I lucked out and got a job here. So I was just curious on some of your thoughts on how do we keep people in these positions so they can help keep other people in other positions.
I want to say one thing, and then you have more relevance, I'm sure. But as owners, we have to be asking ourselves, and as baristas, we have to ask our owners, so the owners of the businesses we work for, is this fair, what you're paying me? How much are you paying yourself? Now, these are, okay, problematic questions. And in fact, I have had conversations with roasters who've asked me for the yearly salary of the producers, and I've been like, well, what's your yearly salary? Because it goes both ways, you know. But if we're going to do ethical business, it goes both ways. Baristas need to be paid enough money that there's quality of life and sustainability there, or a plan to get there. No roaster can boast about buying coffee ethically and treat its employees badly. I say this as somebody who's worked as a barista, as a manager, as a cafe owner, and now as an importer. We got to have the same standards across the board. Okay. Or whoever.
Well, I think that we can kind of tie this in with the previous question too. I think that for us, kind of transparency has kind of been our policy, and how honest we are with staff. I think that, you know, Karen and I are running this business. We're there every day, and sharing much about what it is like to run a business. We have no time for anything. Our costs for this coffee, for example, are so factoring into this cost. It's our costs are higher because we're a smaller business. We have no, you know, our time is money too. Talking with staff and being open and honest has seemed like it's worked quite well, though I think that what I would recommend is just investing in your barista's interests in a way. I feel very privileged, though, to say it. We're a small company. We are a very small but mighty team, and so just kind of jumping on any barista's particular interest. If they're not interested in latte art throwdowns, I'm not going to push that. If they're interested in cupping, like talk about staff leading cuppings. We do, though, have to be very real and honest about our capacities and like what we can and can't do. But I think that it's like noticing that excitement and just like fostering it. I wish Karen was up here answering this question with me.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I'm Karen. So to add on to that, just to say, like, we had a staff retreat where everyone was paid to retreat that day to have a 2-hour session about cost of production. They were given reading materials beforehand that they were paid to read. So we're trying to incentivize them by paying them, we didn't quiz them afterwards or anything. We were trusting that they were taking interest in that material. What else? Oh, I just lost my train of thought. We have a transparency wage model that we set up, and that's starting wages. We include in our orientation what we make. We include the debt that we've gone into opening the cafe. So just being really honest and open about it. And, we have folks who want to open their own cafe. So we're like, are you ready to make this investment? This is what it'll look like. So yeah, just kind of piggybacking on to what Mike said, trying to be as open and honest as possible. That's also a privilege that we have. we are coming with financial backing that other folks don't have. Loans from family and that kind of thing. So, I feel like we're in a privileged position to even share that information. I know that other people aren't necessarily in that same position. So that comes from examining our privilege, and just, being open to sharing that information.
Thank you, Karen. I think that for me, starting as a barista, I knew that after my first cupping, literally, that I wanted to stay in coffee, and got into roasting from there and training and consulting. But I had people helping foster that. I worked with plenty of people who did just want to do it as a job, and so I think trying to be aware and sensitive and receptive to that is one of the greatest challenges of owning a business.
You guys, thank you so much for your time, energy, driving all the way up here. All of you guys are in the Portland area, except for Christy. I know you happen to be here on vacation, but you came from Guatemala, technically. So, yeah, a little further away. You take the cake on that one. Thank you guys all so much for listening. I know that there's some of you in the audience who might have green coffee buying power, and you might be hearing this conversation and kind of worrying, I can't take another hit to the finances. But honestly, if we really look at this conversation or business in general as a house, or this coffee industry as a house, and instead of adding a second or a third story, we first need to fix the foundation, because that really is where we're headed. We can't sustain where this is going. So we get that this conversation is scary and there isn't a straight roadmap forward, but to be invested and to be here is it's such an honor to be here with you guys. Thank you guys for answering all these questions. It was extremely edifying for me, even though you've already answered them for me a couple of times. So I very much appreciate that. Thank you, La Marzocco staff, for serving coffee all night. You guys rock. Yeah. Thank you, Oatly, for sponsoring this event. All of the food and drinks back here are all from them. They just rock. Yeah. Thank you, KEXP, for letting us use your space. Brandon, you rock. Thank you, Aaron, for recording. Aaron's the guy. He lives here in Seattle. He does everything for us. Thank you guys all so much for coming. We're honored to be talking about this with you. Have a good night. If you want to ask anybody questions, that's great. If you want to just get their contact info and ask via email, that's probably really easy too. So have a good night, everybody. Drive safe.